My name is Marissa Langley. I'm 36, and I teach high school science in a town most people forget exists. When my grandfather died, my family gave me a handshake, a hug, and 30 acres of worthless desert, then laughed like they were handing me a punchline instead of an inheritance. Grab a cup of coffee, settle into your favorite spot, and let's share this story together. Before we begin, drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing how our stories bring people together from all over. Now, relax and enjoy. I never imagined that after my grandfather died, my family would smile sweetly in a lawyer's office, then laugh out loud when they handed me 30 acres of desert and a rusted camper as my inheritance. The office smelled like dust, sweat, and fake lemon polish. I'd driven 3 hours from Alamogordo for this, what was supposed to be a respectful reading of Grandpa Lewis's will. Instead, I was sitting across from my brother Alan, who was already smirking like the outcome was rigged before I even walked in. "Miss Langley," the lawyer, Mr. Price, said, flipping through a manila folder that looked like it had seen better decades. "Your grandfather's final estate decisions were unconventional." That word stuck in the air like a fly on honey. Alan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Let me guess. She gets the telescope or something." My mother sat to my left, all pearls and pressed linen, her hands folded like she was in church. My father stared at the floor, expression unreadable. Mr. Price cleared his throat. "To Marissa Langley, my granddaughter, I leave the 30-acre parcel located at..." He paused, then read out a string of coordinates that meant nothing to me, along with the trailer currently on that land and any structures or contents therein. Silence. Then Alan laughed. Actually laughed. Like someone had just told him a joke. "You gave her that land?" he said, turning to Mom. "The dead zone? That land's nothing but rattlesnakes and sagebrush." Mom gave me a look, gentle, pitying. "Honey, don't be upset. He probably just wanted to leave you something." Alan snorted. "We got the house, the vineyard, and the antique car collection. She got the coordinates to a sun-baked dust bowl." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My ears were buzzing. The heat outside suddenly felt like it had seeped inside me. Mr. Price kept reading. Alan was officially gifted the house, the 6-acre family vineyard, and Grandpa's prized '66 Thunderbird. My parents were handed bank accounts, furniture, jewelry, everything valuable and shiny. All I got was a piece of land nobody wanted and a trailer that hadn't seen maintenance since the Bush administration. I stared down at the key Mr. Price slid across the table. It was scratched and tarnished, taped to a yellow post-it note with the words, "For M," written in Grandpa's spidery cursive. Alan nudged my arm. "Guess you'll be starting your real estate empire out of a tin can." "Alan," Mom said, her voice barely a whisper, "be kind." But she didn't stop him. None of them did. Outside, the sun hit me like a freight train. The parking lot shimmered. I stood next to my car for a long time, the key in my hand, burning against my palm. They didn't even ask if I was okay, just got into Dad's SUV and drove off. The tires crunched the gravel like punctuation. My phone buzzed. A message from a student. "Miss Langley, are you really leaving the school?" I didn't answer. I didn't even know if I had anything left to stay for. Grandpa and I weren't loud about our bond. He was quiet, gruff in that old New Mexico rancher way, didn't believe in big hugs or "I love yous." But we had our thing. Science. He built me a solar oven when I was 12, taught me how to read a compass, gave me a notebook full of sun pattern drawings and said, "One day, you're gonna build something bigger than this old place." We'd sit on the back porch drinking sweet tea and tracking the sun across the sky with his old pocket watch. He called it chasing power. I just called it grandpa time. He never said much about the land, only that it was peaceful and off the grid. I assumed it was where he went to think. I never imagined it would be the only part of him left to me. I climbed into my car and turned the AC up full blast, but it still felt like I couldn't breathe. They gave me dust. They gave me nothing. They gave me trash and called it inheritance. But Grandpa never did anything without a reason. He didn't care about money or status. He cared about ideas, about possibility. I turned the key over in my hand again, remembering something he used to say when we'd go stargazing. Dirt's just potential waiting for a reason. I tucked the key into my pocket, started the engine, and pulled out of that parking lot. The desert was waiting. So was the truth. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, tell me in the comments. Let's talk about what they thought was worthless and how you turned it into something they'll never take back. If you've ever stood in the middle of nowhere, clutching a key to something no one else believed in, you'll know exactly how I felt pulling up to Grandpa's land just before sunset. I didn't expect much. I really didn't. But even with my expectations set 6 feet under, what I saw when I turned off the dirt road hit me like a punch I should have seen coming. 30 acres of absolute nothing. Dry, cracked earth stretched out in every direction. Red and brown tones, peppered with scattered mesquite trees that looked half dead, half angry. A few stubborn cacti stood around like exiled sentinels. The wind blew dust through the air in slow, lazy swirls that made the horizon shimmer like a mirage. And in the middle of it all sat the trailer. It was silver, weather-worn, probably from the 80s. The kind of structure that looks like it could collapse if you leaned on it wrong. But somehow, it still stood. A wooden porch had been added to the front, nailed together with mismatched planks. One side leaned slightly, giving the whole thing the posture of someone pretending not to be tired. I parked my car under the only patch of shade I could find, a hunched tree whose best days were clearly behind it, and stepped out. The heat slapped me across the face like it had a grudge. I stood there a long moment, hands on my hips, just staring. This was it. This was what my family had laughed at. The land they called a punchline. And I turned slowly, trying to see what Grandpa might have seen, but there was no water source, no road access besides the dirt track I came in on, no crops, no sign of life except for the distant hum of cicadas and maybe a few vultures already circling to see how long I'd last. I climbed the creaking porch stairs and unlocked the front door. It opened with a groan, like it hadn't been touched in years. A rush of stale air met me, thick with dust, and something else. Tobacco, maybe. Grandpa's scent, a little bittersweet, like time had stopped inside. The trailer was tiny but clean. No trash, no rot, no animals. Just lived in, once. The kitchen was compact. A propane stove, chipped tile counters, a half-empty canister of coffee grounds. The living space held a small couch with a sun-bleached quilt thrown over it, a standing lamp, and a bookshelf with a cracked spine copy of Sun Farming, The Renewable Future. I blinked. Down the narrow hall was a single bedroom with an old mattress, a closet, and a tiny bathroom that reminded me of an RV, compact but functional. It wasn't much, but it was more than I expected. Still, this wasn't a home. This was exile with plumbing. I set my bag down on the couch and rubbed my forehead. The silence was heavy, like the trailer itself was waiting to exhale. That's when I saw it. On the small dining table, perfectly centered, sat an old cassette player. Next to it was a worn leather pouch holding a handful of tapes, each labeled in Grandpa's handwriting. One simply read, "For M." My breath caught. I reached out slowly and slid it into the player. Click. Then came the sound of static, and then Grandpa's voice. "Marissa, if you're listening to this, then I'm long gone, and I hope you're not cursing me too badly right now." I sat down. "Look around you. I know what it looks like, but I didn't give you nothing. I gave you something the others didn't have the heart to understand. This land, it's got its own kind of potential, but it'll only show itself to someone with vision. Someone like you. I bit my lip, eyes burning. I didn't pick this place at random. I studied it for years. Sunlight patterns, soil temps, reflective indexes, but none of it mattered unless someone would take it further. I tried. Lord knows I tried. But I was born too early. You, though, you're right on time. He paused, and I swear I could hear the smile in his voice. You see what others don't. That's your gift. Click. The tape ended. I sat there, staring at the player like it might say more. Everything inside me twisted. Grief, confusion, a strange warmth I couldn't quite name. He'd left this for me. Not by accident, not as a joke. He chose this. I pressed rewind. The soft whir of the cassette filled the silence. Then, I hit play again. Chapter 2. I didn't move for a long time. I just listened to Grandpa's voice repeat the same words again, softer this time. You see what others don't. And for the first time since the will reading, I started to wonder, what had he seen out here? Have you ever inherited something no one else understood? Drop a comment below. I want to hear your story. Sometimes, the things we're given come wrapped in silence, but hold the loudest truth. There's a strange comfort in the quiet of the desert. No cars, no texts, no background hum of other people's expectations, just the wind, the heat, and me, and Grandpa's voice. I woke up the next morning with the sunrise blasting through the trailer's cracked blinds, the mattress under me hard as a rock, and a strange feeling I hadn't had in months. Focus. Still in my sleep shirt, I padded to the little table, popped open the tape pouch, and fed a new cassette into the player. This one was labeled Phase 0. I hit play, half expecting static. Instead, his voice crackled to life, steady and low. Marissa, if you're ready to keep listening, then I guess you're ready to start seeing. I leaned forward. This land isn't what it seems. It never was. You remember that little project we did when you were 13, with the thermometers and the graph paper? You helped me log sun angles for 6 weeks straight and didn't complain once. I knew then. You had the eyes. You saw patterns. My throat tightened. I did remember. I spent 2 decades logging this land's behavior. Its seasons, soil temps, light intensity. I even submitted a solar viability study to the DOE in 1984. They laughed me out the room, said I was just a desert dreamer, but I kept my notes. I kept everything. He paused. They couldn't see it, but I think you can. The sun is the engine of the world, Marissa. Always has been. I pressed pause and just sat there, stunned. He wasn't kidding. This wasn't just Grandpa being poetic. He was trying to leave me a map. I stepped outside into the full blaze of morning. The desert spread around me like an empty canvas. I squinted at the hard-packed dirt, remembering the way we used to mark sun shadows with chalk back on the porch in Las Cruces. That old metal sundial, his pencil-scrawled notebooks. Suddenly, I didn't see 30 acres of nothing. I saw a test site. That afternoon, I drove 20 miles to Deming's Public Library. I hadn't stepped into one since I left teaching, and the musty scent of old carpet and faded paper hit me like a memory I wasn't ready for. Behind the desk was a woman with thick glasses and hair like a silver halo. "Excuse me," I said. "I'm looking for any old solar energy journals, government reports, anything from the 80s, maybe?" She blinked. "You with a company?" "No, I hesitated. "I'm Marissa Langley. My grandfather was Lewis Carter." Her face lit up. "Lewis? Oh, honey, you're his granddaughter. He used to sit in that corner right over there with stacks of science magazines and a thermos of black coffee, always scribbling in those yellow notepads. I smiled. He told me he came here a lot. He sure did. That man checked out every book this library had on solar farming, even the weird ones from Arizona State. Said he was preparing for something nobody else understood yet. I swallowed hard. Did he ever leave anything here? Notes? Papers? She frowned thoughtfully, then motioned for me to follow her. 15 minutes later, I was at a table with 4 government pamphlets from the 1980s, one of which had a faded sticky note in Grandpa's handwriting that read, "Viable under 110 degrees F. Note, soil conductivity." I copied every word, every chart. My mind was already turning. Chaite. Back at the trailer, I dug through the cabinet below the kitchen sink, searching for anything. Papers, notebooks, even just scraps. Nothing. Then I noticed the floorboard under the dining table had a small notch, barely visible, but just enough to catch the tip of a screwdriver. It popped up with a creak. Inside was a weathered wooden crate, dust-covered, padlocked, but the key taped to the lid made it clear who it was for. On the top was a single phrase burned into the wood. Solar Phase 1, for Marissa. I sat there on the floor, staring at that box like it held dynamite. Maybe it did. The kind of quiet, patient dynamite that changes everything. Not with a bang, but with sunlight. If someone ever left you a mystery to solve, a letter, a box, a secret you weren't ready for, comment, "I've been there," below. Let's talk about the legacies we don't see until we're forced to. Chaku. There's something about the wind out here at night. It doesn't whisper like it does in town. It howls, full of grit and ghosts, and every word you wish you'd said out loud. I sat cross-legged on the trailer floor, the wooden crate in front of me, my palms flat against the lid like it might vanish if I blinked too long. Solar Phase 1, for Marissa. The words stared up at me, hand burned into the grain. My chest felt tight. He knew I'd find this. He'd planned for it. The key was taped beneath the lid. I peeled it off with shaky fingers, heart thumping like I was opening a time capsule built for one. The lock popped open. Inside, it smelled like cedar, dust, and something that almost felt like trust. There were notebooks, 6 of them, labeled by year. Then a hard-bound binder with metal rings barely holding together its thick contents. On the front, Grandpa's handwriting again. DOE Grant Application, 1985, Carter Solar Study, Phase 1. I sat back, breath caught halfway up my throat. I opened the binder slowly, like it might crumble in my hands, and there it was, typed pages, hand-drawn graphs, topographical overlays of the land, soil readings, solar exposure charts, even cost estimates. I flipped to the first page and read the title. Solar Array Feasibility for Rural Desert Land. Southwest Corridor, Grid Proposal. The document was addressed to the U.S. Department of Energy, dated June 12, 1985. He hadn't just dreamed about solar farming. He'd tried to build one. In the middle of nowhere, with no funding, in a time when nobody took renewable energy seriously, he'd mapped out a solar future, on this land, 30 acres that my family laughed at, that I had laughed at. But Grandpa? He had seen something, and they had called him crazy. There was a rejection letter tucked in the back, a politely worded brush-off from a federal official. Too early, too ambitious, no backing. I ran my fingers over the red-stamped "denied" like it was a wound. But underneath the letter, clipped with a rusted paperclip, was a post-it note. His handwriting again. Crooked, shaky. They couldn't see it. Maybe they weren't supposed to. But you might. The trailer creaked in the wind. The loose panel on the porch slapped against the wood frame with a metallic thunk, thunk, thunk. I felt the tears before I noticed them, hot and silent, sliding down my face while I sat there, surrounded by plans drawn decades before I'd ever considered what legacy really meant. All this time, I thought I'd inherited failure. But what I'd really inherited was vision. I spread the papers out on the floor, grid diagrams, projected sunlight hours, energy output estimates. He had calculated power yields to the decimal, based on data from this land, this soil. He wasn't guessing, and suddenly the land outside didn't look so empty. It looked chosen. I pulled the little cassette player from the table and flipped through the tapes, found one labeled Sun Engine, Phase 1, slid it in, hit play. His voice was older here, slower, but steady. If you're looking at the binder, good. That means you opened the crate. That means maybe you're ready. I swallowed hard. This land, it's not the kind you pass down because it's easy or pretty. It's the kind you leave to someone who can see, the kind you hope might outlive you. He paused. Everything I ever wanted to do, I tucked into that folder. Maybe I wasn't the one meant to finish it, but I knew it would take someone like you, someone with stubbornness and science in equal measure. My hand went to my chest. It physically hurt, not from grief, but from the weight of being seen, by someone who hadn't been around to say it when it counted, but still made sure I'd hear it when it mattered. They thought they gave me dust, but what they didn't know was that Grandpa had already planted something out here, and I was holding the blueprint. I looked down at the binder, its corners curled with time, and whispered to the wind slicing through the cracked window frame. They laughed. But this might be the only real legacy he left. Have you ever found something left behind that changed everything you thought you knew? A letter, a box, a file? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes the quietest inheritance holds the loudest truth. There's something surreal about chasing a dead man's dream. Especially when that dream involves hauling solar panels through a desert where the most high-tech thing for miles is a rusted windmill. But that's where I was, on a Monday morning, in borrowed boots, with sand in places it didn't belong, trying to prove Grandpa wasn't crazy. The grant application from the Department of Energy was a monster. 47 pages of bureaucratic jargon. Impact projections, site maps, environmental assessments, budget justifications, all of it needing to be perfect and fast. I spread everything out across the trailer's table. Grandpa's charts, my new soil readings, hand-drawn layout ideas for panel placements. The binder he left behind had enough technical data to choke a government server. Still, part of me wondered if I was wasting my time. What was I even doing out here? I didn't have money or backers, just some dusty coordinates and an old man's voice in my ear. But every time I thought about giving up, I heard Grandpa say it again. The sun is the engine of the world. I drove into town the next day to hit up the supply store. Deming's not big, just a strip of gas stations, faded storefronts, and a cafe that still advertises free coffee refills like it's 1982. I bought what I could afford: a single used solar panel, a charge controller, 2 deep cycle batteries, and a converter I wasn't entirely sure worked. The guy behind the counter looked at me like I'd just asked if they sold rocket fuel. "You trying to power a spaceship, ma'am?" "Nope," I said. "Just lighting up a memory." He blinked. I left him confused and drove back to the trailer with the panel tied down in the back of my car with 2 bungee cords and a lot of hope. That evening, I stared at the panel like it might bite me. I had the education. I'd taught high school physics, helped kids build model turbines out of cardboard and coat hangers. But standing alone in a desert, tools in hand, dust in my mouth, I suddenly felt 12 years old again. But I did what Grandpa always told me to do when something felt too big. Start small, then keep going. I mounted the panel at an angle on the porch, hooked up the wires to the charge controller, connected the battery terminals, adjusted the inverter, then waited. By late afternoon, the battery had soaked in enough energy to give it a test. I walked inside, held my breath, and flipped the switch. Click. Then, the soft, almost sheepish glow of the trailer's main light bulb. Dim, but real. I let out a shaky laugh and sat down on the floor. It wasn't much, but it was something. I texted the only person I knew who wouldn't laugh, Tommy Guerra. We went through the ag tech program together at New Mexico State. He now worked in Albuquerque for a solar startup. Last I heard, we hadn't talked in years, but he'd always been the kind of guy who got excited about weird things, like desert soil conductivity and heat retention ratios. Me. Hey, this is Marissa Langley. You still working solar? Less than a minute later. Tommy. Langley? You're not dead? Also, yes, absolutely. What's up? We talked that night for almost 2 hours. I told him everything. About the land, Grandpa's tapes, the old proposal. He was quiet for a long moment. You know, he finally said, people laughed at my cousin when he tried to build a panel array on abandoned farmland in Carrizozo. Now he's getting paid by the state. Think this place could qualify? You've got sunlight, open land, and history. That's basically the Holy Trinity. You get a few more panels up and show the data, and I guarantee someone's going to listen. He paused. And it's kinda awesome that Lewis Carter was your grandfather. Some of his solar articles are still floating around forums. That stopped me cold. Wait, he published stuff? Yeah, fringe stuff mostly. But I remember reading a thread once called The Carter Pattern, about solar angle optimization in high heat zones. I stared at the trailer ceiling, the bulb still faintly glowing. He wasn't a joke. He was a pioneer. And I had the evidence. The next morning, I set up a notepad and began logging hourly sunlight, temperature swings, and output voltages. I used my phone to scan every page of Grandpa's old blueprints, backed everything up, printed a map of the land, and marked where I could expand the array when this worked. My hands were blistered, my neck sunburned. But for the first time since I left the school, I felt alive. That night, I flipped the switch again. The trailer lit up. A soft hum. A steady light. I whispered to the dark outside, "This is just the beginning." Have you ever built something from nothing? A project, a dream, a second chance? Tell me in the comments, especially if no one believed in it but you. If this story touches you, drop a number 1 in the comments. Every one reminds us that these stories matter, and it gives us the motivation to keep sharing them with you. You know what's funny? Growing up, I didn't realize I was invisible. Not until I started making noise no one wanted to hear. I used to think the vineyard was magic. That's what my mom always called it. Our magical little oasis. It was neat rows of grapes, sun-warmed porches, lemonade in mason jars, but that magic only extended to Alan. Alan could do no wrong. He'd crash Grandpa's tractor? Boys will be boys. He'd skip chores. He needs rest. He's growing. He'd flunk his calculus exam? Well, he's more of a business mind. Me. I built a solar-powered bug trap in the 7th grade science fair, won 3rd place at state, and no one even came to the ceremony. I remember sitting on the porch steps afterward, metal around my neck, dusty from the drive back from Albuquerque. Grandpa sat down beside me with 2 sodas, handed me one and said, "One day this place'll run on your ideas, not their approval." I didn't believe him then. I do now. Flash forward to high school. My guidance counselor called a meeting with my parents. I'd told her I wanted to apply to the engineering program at Stanford. I thought it would be a proud moment. Instead, my mom looked at me across the office table, lips pressed in that tight way she had when she was about to cut someone down quietly. "Marissa," she said, "girls don't build farms. They marry men who own them." Even the counselor blinked. "She's got a full scholarship profile." My dad chuckled. "That's cute, but she'll come back here eventually." This is home. And that was that. I still applied. I got in, but I didn't go. Sometimes people don't steal from you with a crowbar. They do it with a smile and a soft voice and years of convincing you that you're not the right shape to fit in your own life. I stayed in New Mexico, went to a state school, got my degree, taught high school, paid my bills, stayed quiet. But I never stopped sketching ideas in the margins of notebooks. Solar layouts, passive cooling systems, blueprints that had no home, just dreams folded inside bigger dreams. Now, sitting at the trailer's makeshift desk, I unroll one of Grandpa's old schematics. It's smudged and yellowed, but the math still checks out. I trace the lines with my finger, remembering how he used to explain current flow like water trickling down a canyon. "Energy's not hard," he'd say. "It's just movement in disguise." He'd talk while I soldered copper joints for our science projects. He never once asked why I liked circuits more than baking. I open a new notebook, label the top, Solar Diary, Phase 1, and I start writing. Not just the data, the sunlight logs, the battery output, the panel angles, but what it feels like to reclaim something no one wanted me to have. Every entry starts with the temperature. Every entry ends with a question I still don't have the answer to. Today's, how do you keep going when you're building something no one can see yet? Out the window, the land looks empty, but I know better now. This isn't nothing. It's potential, it's a battlefield, and it's mine. You know, when Grandpa left me the land, people thought he was being spiteful or senile, like maybe he just forgot to list something more useful. But no. He remembered exactly what I was, the quiet one, the overlooked one. The one who listened when he talked about photons and panel tilt and cumulative yield across seasons. He didn't leave me out. He left me ahead. I look down at the notebook, pen still in hand, and I write it plainly. They left me out, but Grandpa knew better. Have you ever been the forgotten one? The quiet kid in the corner? Type, "still standing" in the comments if you turned that silence into strength. You ever feel like the world's pretending not to hear you? On purpose? That's how it started. Not with a door slammed in my face, but with a slow drip of silence that felt too deliberate to be coincidence. The county clerk's office was colder than usual. Not the temperature, the vibe. It was my third visit in 2 weeks. My paperwork should have been processed by now. I stood at the counter with my folder of documents, smiling politely. "Hi, I'm just checking on the solar zoning request I submitted." "It's been..." "Still pending." The clerk cut me off without looking up. She tapped her keyboard a little too fast. "We didn't receive the tax parcel map. Application's incomplete." I blinked. I submitted it, twice. Once online and again in person. Her fingers stopped typing. She glanced at my folder like it was radioactive. Then she lowered her voice, just slightly. "Maybe submit it again, just in case." And that's when I felt it. That tightening in my chest. that silent alarm going off in my gut. I walked back to my car and sat in the driver's seat, staring through the windshield at the sun-baked horizon. The reflection of my own face stared back at me, tired, hopeful, a little less trusting than a few weeks ago. That's when I remembered something from the vineyard dinner. Alan's wife, Camille, had said she was coordinating utilities and zoning for a few upcoming developments. County zoning. Of course. Chapter out. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, but the next day, I got an email from the zoning office marked urgent. It said my solar site plan had been mislabeled and couldn't be processed under the current docket. I'd need to resubmit with an updated form, which was mysteriously no longer available online. I'd have to come in person to pick it up. I stared at the email for a long time, not because I was confused, but because I was done being naive. This wasn't inefficiency. This was sabotage. That night, I called Tommy. He picked up on the second ring, voice muffled like he was under the hood of a car. "Hey, Solar Queen, what's up?" I told him everything. The delay, the missing form, Camille's sudden role in county zoning. He whistled low. "So they're pulling strings now. Classy." "Do you think I'm being paranoid?" "No," he said, without hesitation. "I think you're finally seeing how scared they are." "Of what?" "Of you doing something real. Something they can't control or take back." The next morning, I walked into the clerk's office with 2 fresh copies of every form, one in a binder, one in a sealed envelope, and one tiny lapel pin on my jacket. A body cam I'd borrowed from Tommy's garage, usually used for trail biking. No more playing nice. No more trusting silence. I asked for Camille directly. They said she was off-site. I asked for a timestamp on when my original forms were received. They said, "We don't track that." I asked if I could review the zoning submission log. They told me I'd need to file a formal request. So I smiled. And I left. That afternoon, I drove out to the desert and paced along the edge of the property. The sun was high and merciless. My boots crunched over cracked earth. My hand brushed across the first mounted solar panel, still humming, still alive. I wasn't imagining this. They were trying to wear me down, paper by paper, glitch by glitch, but they didn't know how long I could stand in the sun. That night, I wrote a new solar diary entry. Short, sharp. Sabotage started today. That means I've become visible. Keep going. The next day, Tommy showed up with a truckload of scrap material. "Didn't say I was bringing help," he grinned. "But I figured if the county keeps losing your papers, you might as well give 'em something they can't ignore." He hauled out an old road sign. Blank on one side, clean metal on the other. We painted it white, stenciled a single word in bright yellow. "Coming soon, Langley Light." We planted it right by the dirt road leading into my 30 acres of nothing. Tommy took a step back, squinting at the sign in the heat haze. Then he looked at me and said, real calm, "They're trying to stop you." "That means you're onto something." I nodded, the wind whipping my hair across my face. "They started the game. Now I'll play it better." Have you ever felt sabotaged just for chasing your dream? Comment, "Keep shining," if you've ever fought back without losing your light. If your family ever invites you to dinner after months of ignoring you, be suspicious, especially if it's at the vineyard. Especially if the email says, "Let's reconnect and put things behind us." And especially if your brother signs it with a smiley face. I should have trusted my gut, but part of me still wanted to believe it, that maybe, just maybe, they were turning a corner. So I wore a navy dress, fixed my hair, and brought a bottle of wine Grandpa had given me years ago. the last one I'd saved. I parked under the same cottonwood tree I used to climb as a kid. The gravel crunched under my heels as I walked to the front porch. It looked the same. Smelled the same. Roses, soil, sunburnt wood. But something about it felt rehearsed. The front door opened before I knocked. Alan stood there with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Mar, look at you. Real desert chic. I forced a smile. It's just a dress, Alan. He stepped aside with a flourish. Come in. We've been waiting. We? Before he could answer, I saw them. Mom already pouring herself a glass of something expensive. Dad standing near the fireplace like a boardroom CEO about to deliver bad news. My heart dropped. This wasn't dinner. This was strategy. We sat at the long oak table. No one touched the lasagna. The small talk was strained. Alan asked how camping in the desert was going. Mom commented on how thin I looked, which she always meant as an insult. Dad offered to pour me a glass of wine, then conveniently forgot my answer. Finally, Alan leaned forward, elbows on the table. Let's talk business. There it was. The real reason I was here. He pulled out a yellow envelope and slid it across the table like it was a menu. I've been talking with some buyers. There's interest in that land of yours. Oil company. Maybe solar, I don't know. You're in over your head, Marissa. This could be a win for all of us. I didn't open the envelope. I'm not selling, I said quietly. You haven't even looked. I don't need to look. Dad spoke next. His voice was soft, but it had that familiar blade edge. You think you're untouchable out there, but that trailer won't protect you from legal fire if someone files a claim. Mom nodded, dabbing the corners of her mouth with her napkin. We're trying to protect you, sweetheart. This isn't a world you understand. I took a slow breath and looked around the table. Not one of them had visited Grandpa's trailer. Not one had lifted a finger to maintain his legacy. But now that I'd fought through the dirt and permits and wires, suddenly I needed protecting. I stood. Thanks for dinner, I said, voice steady. Alan scoffed. You're being emotional. I looked at him. You're being predictable. I turned to go. But just as I reached the front door, he followed. Fast, quiet steps on old wood floors. Marissa, he said low, sharp. You're not smart enough to win this. You never were. I turned, locked eyes with him, and smiled. Maybe not, but I was smart enough to make that land matter. Let's see what that makes you. I walked to my car under the cottonwood tree and sat behind the wheel, breathing hard. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I just drove. Past the vines, past the gate, past every lie that used to make me second-guess myself. Back to the dirt they thought was nothing. That night, I poured the wine I brought, not to toast to family, but to bury them in my memory for a while. Then I opened my journal and wrote, They want the land now, not because they see Grandpa's dream, but because they see money. They're not afraid I'll fail. They're afraid I already haven't. Back at the trailer, I rewound the first cassette again. Grandpa's voice crackling. Don't let 'em scare you, Em. They only fight what they can't control. Some envelopes feel heavier than others. This one? It might as well have weighed 1,000 pounds. I knew before I even opened it. Thick paper. Government seal. That polite, cold phrasing you only ever see when someone's telling you no. But in a suit and tie. I ripped it open anyway. We regret to inform you that your application for the Department of Energy's Emerging Solar Projects grant has been denied at this time. It went on. I stopped reading. My throat clenched. Not because I didn't expect it, but because I'd let myself hope. Just a little. I walked out to the trailer porch with the letter dangling from my fingers. The horizon was starting to glow pink, that soft desert light that makes you believe anything is possible. Except, apparently, funding your dream. I sat in the cracked lawn chair Grandpa had left behind, the one with the faded American flag on the seat. The cassette was still playing inside, his voice humming through the thin trailer walls. Solar's not just about panels, it's about patience. You don't force the sun, you work with it. Easy for him to say. His world hadn't come with credit scores and zoning boards. Later that day, I put on my only decent blazer and drove 30 miles into town. The bank smelled like new carpet and old coffee. I waited under the buzz of a flickering fluorescent light for what felt like forever. Finally, Lyle, a 30-something banker with warm eyes and an overworn tie, called me into his office. He looked over my application, my notes, my budget spreadsheet. He asked thoughtful questions. Then he leaned back and sighed. Your numbers are good. Your plan? Honestly, it's impressive. But without a financial cosigner or anchor investor, we can't move forward. I'm sorry. Anchor investor. That was the phrase I kept repeating in my head the whole drive home. Not denied. Not, we can't move forward. Just that one possibility he'd quietly slid across the desk. Anchor investor. Back at the trailer, I stared at my charts, sun exposure logs, peak hour notes, soil temp readings. Grandpa and I started taking when I was 15. He'd taught me to measure by instinct first, instruments second. Feel the ground, then prove it on paper. I pulled out the old manila folders, labeled in his tight block handwriting. Phase 1, feasibility. Taped inside was something I hadn't noticed before. A photocopy of a letter from a university researcher. Dated 1985. It confirmed the soil and topography had above-average photovoltaic potential. I blinked. Grandpa had peer-reviewed support, even back then. I went outside, kneeled down and touched the dirt. Hot, cracked, unforgiving. But I saw it differently now. This wasn't failure. This was proof the right people hadn't seen it yet. Tag. I grabbed a shovel and started digging. Not metaphorically, literally. I wanted to feel the earth in my hands again. Like when Grandpa and I buried that time capsule during the eclipse. The deeper I went, the more layers of sediment I noticed. The patterns, the way the sun struck each clump. Dry, yes, but rich with possibility. Exactly what solar loves. Exposure, flatland, no shade. That night, I drew out a new plan. No grant, no loan, just me. I'd work overtime tutoring if I had to, sell the vintage telescope in storage, get creative with salvaged panels from resale auctions, recruit Tommy to help wire it, maybe trade sweat equity. If no one would give me a shot, I'd give one to myself. The desert doesn't hand you things, it waits, tests you. Then, maybe, if you're stubborn enough, it gives in, just a little. I wrote across the top of a fresh notebook page in bold, permanent marker. No grant, no problem. If no one funds me, I'll build it with my own hands. Ever been told no and kept going anyway? Tell me below. Because sometimes all you need is one yes. And it starts with yourself. I never thought a $600 check would make me cry. But when I held it in my hands, creased from the envelope, smelling faintly like toner and cheap glue, I felt something shift. Not in the air, not in the desert, in me. Let me back up. 2 weeks earlier, I was standing barefoot on sun-scorched dirt, holding a borrowed voltmeter and wondering if I'd finally lost it. Tommy had just driven in from Silver City in his dusty work truck, a thermos of black coffee in one hand and a panel strap thrown over his shoulder like a guitar case. He grinned like this was just another Saturday project. I, on the other hand, hadn't slept in 36 hours. "Still sure this won't fry the trailer?" I asked, squinting as he tilted the first panel into position. He winked. "Only one way to find out." That's the thing about Tommy. He's the kind of guy who believes in duct tape, direct current, and dumb luck. But under all that flannel and sarcasm, he's sharp. MIT smart. Dropped out for reasons no one ever really asks about. I didn't either. I just knew I needed someone who saw what I saw. And he did. We set up the first 2 panels on the south-facing slope. Just salvaged ones from a farm auction. Mismatched, worn, but functional. Then the battery bank came next. Inverters, connectors. A jerry-rigged junction box inside the trailer kitchen. By nightfall, it looked like a science fair project gone rogue. But the voltmeter blinked green. And that meant something was alive. The next morning, I made the call to the utility company. They weren't impressed. "Ma'am, we don't typically approve residential tie-ins for DIY systems." "I'm not residential," I said. "I'm experimental." There was a pause. A few keystrokes. Then, "We'll send someone out for an inspection." 2 days later, a truck pulled up, white with blue trim. A middle-aged technician with sunburned cheeks and sunglasses stepped out. He looked over everything, nodded once, and said, "You're not crazy." I nearly kissed him. That same week, I opened a tiny online energy dashboard the company had sent me. A few kilowatt hours here, a few more the next day. And then came the first transfer. $673. Tiny, sure, but it was real. Power, from my panels, into the grid. I stared at the check when it arrived like it was some kind of sacred relic, a paycheck from the sun, signed by my own grit. I didn't even cash it. Instead, I drove to the nearest Walgreens and bought a black frame, taped the check inside. Hung it above Grandpa's tape recorder, next to the logbook I'd started filling in every day. That night, I sat on the trailer steps, barefoot again. Tommy handed me a warm beer, and we watched the panels catch the last of the light. "I gotta admit," he said, tapping the side of the inverter, "I didn't think it'd work this fast." I smiled, chin resting on my knees. "It's not fast. It's just finally visible." "Yeah." He looked at me sideways. "You gonna tell them?" He meant Alan, my parents, everyone who'd mocked me. I shook my head. "No, not yet. Let them stay in the dark a little longer." Because here's the truth. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a tiny green light blinking on in a dusty trailer. Sometimes it's a utility check taped to a wall. Sometimes it's knowing that the joke they made at your expense just turned into your blueprint. I opened Grandpa's tape again that night. Rewound it. Let his voice fill the room. "You don't need to outrun anyone, Marissa. You just need to keep walking long after they stop." He wasn't wrong. And now? Now I had proof. I stood in the glow of my first working panel, framed check in hand, and whispered, "Proof. Real, undeniable proof." If you've ever had a gut punch arrive in a manila envelope, you'll understand what I felt that morning. I was halfway through logging solar output, a good day, 8.6 kilowatt hours by noon, when the white courier truck rolled up the dirt path, trailing dust like smoke behind it. The driver didn't get out, just waved through the window, held up the envelope, and dropped it onto the step like it was junk mail. But it wasn't junk, it was a threat in legal letterhead. The return address said, Foster Tate, Attorneys at Law, Santa Fe, N.M., Allen's new legal team. I knew the second I saw his name, typed in bold under Interested Party, that this wasn't just a formality. This was war. The letter was cold and surgical. Our client, Mr. Allen Langley, is initiating a petition to amend the execution of the Lewis Langley estate, citing the discovery of a revised testament dated 4 months prior to the decedent's death. 4 months. That would have been June. June was when Grandpa started fading in and out, losing track of time. He wasn't even driving by then. I was picking up his groceries and sorting his mail. But apparently, sometime in that fog, he sat down and decided to disinherit me and leave the land to the estate, which just so happened to mean Allen. I sat down on the trailer floor, legs numb, the paper trembling in my hands. They even had a copy of the amended will included. The signature was almost convincing, but almost isn't enough when you've seen the real thing. I stared at it, line by line. Grandpa's signature was always slow and deliberate. This one looked traced, rushed. The angle on the L was wrong, and they'd misspelled Langley once in the body of the document. He would have caught that. Every inch of the page felt like a lie made up by people who thought I wouldn't notice. But I did. My first instinct was to scream. My second was to cry. But my third was survival. Checking. I walked to the cabinet under the window, the one with the plastic tub full of tapes, pulled out the one labeled in Grandpa's handwriting. June 15th, Solar Viability Living Will Notes. Slid it into the player. Pressed play. His voice crackled through the speaker, slow, frail, but him. Marissa, if you're listening to this, it means I'm gone. I've talked to Dean at the legal clinic. He's drafting the final version today. The land's yours. It always was. I won't let them split it up and sell it to someone who doesn't understand what we're doing here. I closed my eyes, biting my lip. That was 2 full weeks after the revised will they claimed existed. He'd been clear. Crystal. They didn't know he'd left me that tape. They didn't know I had time-stamped records, logs, soil reports, letters from the Department of Energy dated months before his death, addressed to me, forwarded by Grandpa himself. They didn't know I'd been building a legacy while they were sniffing around antiques and polishing their inheritance. And now they wanted my land? Because it had finally started to pay? Because I'd made something from the dirt they mocked. I stood up slowly, went outside, and stared at the solar panels humming quietly in the heat. No lawyer could undo what I'd built, not without a fight. That night, I sat at the table in the trailer and pulled out a spiral notebook. Started documenting everything. Dates, quotes, receipts, legal copies. At the top, I wrote in red ink, Timeline of Truth, Langley Solar Project. Then I flipped over the forged copy of the will and scribbled, Fake. And I can prove it. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. I'd seen that coming the moment Allen smiled at the reading of the will. No, the worst part was how calmly they did it. How neatly typed, notarized, and buttoned up their lie was. They thought paperwork could erase love, erase legacy. They were wrong. I slid the tape back into its case, hands steady now. They didn't know he left me this, I whispered. Then I looked at the envelope again and muttered, but they're about to find out. If someone ever tried to rewrite your story with a lie, type "not today" in the comments. Let them know truth always finds its voice. If you've ever stood in a government office with your fists clenched so tight your nails left crescent moons in your palms, then you already know how this part goes. The air inside the Luna County zoning office felt like heat trapped in a metal can. Papers rustled, a fan clicked, and someone 2 desks down was arguing over a chicken coop permit. But I wasn't here for chickens. I was here because I had a name, Alan's wife, and a suspicion that just wouldn't go away. Her name was Laura. Blonde bob, permanent smirk, and a laminated badge that gave her just enough power to ruin someone's week or year. She worked zoning and planning approvals, and guess who'd reviewed my solar application 3 months ago? Right, her. I'd called twice, gotten voicemail, emailed. No record of that, they said, filed a second time in person. Still processing. But last week, I ran into a neighbor who applied for his solar permit, after me, and already had the stamp of approval. That's when I stopped hoping and started planning. So I walked into the office with a smile, a folder under my arm, and my phone recording video from the moment I stepped inside. "Hi," I said sweetly, stepping up to her desk. "I'm just checking on the permit for the Langley parcel again. Sorry if I'm being a pest." She didn't look up right away, just tapped her keyboard and sipped her iced coffee. Then, too casually, "Still in review." "That's strange," I said. "My neighbor 2 plots over just got his signed." She glanced up, fast, and then back at her screen. "Well, different projects. Some get flagged." I tilted my head. "Flagged how?" She shrugged. "It happens when, say, the estate's in dispute, or when there's missing paperwork." Bingo. That's when I laid down the first piece of bait. "Oh, I guess I should have had Alan submit it for me. Might have moved faster," I said, watching her face. She blinked, just once. "Alan?" I smiled. "You know, your husband." She laughed nervously. He's not involved in this." "Oh," I said, voice low. "But I thought maybe you two talk about these files over dinner." "No?" Nothing. But the shift in her posture said enough. My phone, still tucked in my sweater pocket, was catching every word. By the time I stepped back out into the desert heat, I didn't have a permit. But I had something better. Implied manipulation. Favoritism. Conflict of interest. And it was all on tape. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the library. Margaret, sweet, sharp-eyed, and 90 if she was a day, looked up from behind the front desk and smiled. "Back for more zoning maps?" "Actually," I said, "I'm looking for someone who used to work with my grandfather. Legal stuff. Anyone come to mind?" She tapped her chin thoughtfully. "You know, you might want to talk to Miss Janine Ellery. Used to be a paralegal here in town. Did paperwork for half the county before she retired." "Does she still live nearby?" Margaret smiled. "She's 2 booths down from me at bingo every Thursday." The next morning, I was sipping weak coffee at the Sunrise Cafe, across from a woman in thick glasses and a blue windbreaker. Janine didn't waste time. "Your grandfather was the only man I ever met who signed every single page, even if it didn't need it," she said, flipping through the copies I brought her. She studied the supposed revised will, lips pressed tight. "This notary stamp?" she pointed. "Expired 6 years before the date on the document." I blinked. "You're kidding." "Nope. And this page?" she said, tapping it again. "Different font size. That's a cut and paste job. Whoever did this wasn't subtle. Over the next 2 hours, we started compiling what would become my war chest. Original soil reports from Grandpa. Timestamps on the solar grant applications he helped me submit. Letters addressed directly to me. Handwritten by him, notarized properly, blueprints in his handwriting, and, of course, the tapes. That night, back at the trailer, I laid it all out across the fold-out table like a battlefield map. Tape recorder, flash drive, folder of documents, chain of custody notes, Janine's signed affidavit about the notary issue. The paper trail was real, sharp, clean. They wanted war? Fine. I'd give them one-lined in signatures, timestamps, and truth. No screaming, no drama, just proof. I hit record on my phone and whispered, "If they want war, I'll give them the cleanest paper trail they've ever seen." If someone ever tried to block your path out of jealousy or fear, drop a "not today" in the comments. Let them know you see through it. There's something poetic about planning your legal comeback in a booth with cracked vinyl seats, chipped mugs, and a waitress who keeps the coffee flowing like she already knows your life's on fire. It was just past 7 a.m. at the Dusty Spoon Diner. The desert light hadn't fully crept over the mesas yet. The only sound was silverware scraping plates and the hum of possibility. Her name was Helen Ortiz. Late 40s, sharp suit, sharper eyes. Former energy regulation lawyer turned solar rights advocate. And by some miracle, she'd called me back. "I read every page you emailed," she said, flipping open a thick manila folder. "This isn't just dirty, it's stupid dirty. Amateur hour." My heart thudded behind my ribs. "You really think so?" She raised a brow. "Honey, the notary stamp expired 6 years before the will was supposedly signed. You couldn't even get a rental car with that kind of sloppiness." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. All this time, I'd been carrying around fear. Fear that maybe, just maybe, they had something real. Something I missed. But now I had a lawyer sipping black coffee across from me, calling their bluff with a smirk. Helen laid it out simply. First step is a counterfiling. We're not just defending your claim, we're attacking theirs. She tapped her pen on the table. We'll contest the amendment, motion to have the forged document removed from probate, and push for sanctions. If the judge is even half awake, they'll want answers about the notary and the sudden appearance of a revised will after a profitable solar project launched. She glanced up. You're not just a granddaughter with a tape. You're a case. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath until I finally exhaled. It was the first time in months I felt something close to control. Not full victory, not yet, but direction, fire, a plan. We reviewed everything again. The original will copy I had from Grandpa, the timeline of zoning interference, Janine's statement about the forged notary stamp, the solar diary, the tapes. Helen took notes on everything. Then she said, "You know what really sells this?" "What?" "The fact that you're not living in a mansion. You didn't sell the land and run. You're sleeping in a rusted camper, stringing solar panels together by hand. That's going to matter in court. Judges love underdogs who work." We drafted the initial counterfiling right there in the booth. Helen even asked the waitress for a napkin and scrawled a sketch of how she wanted the exhibit table laid out in the courtroom. Evidence chain, original date stamps, financials, and soil reports. It was equal parts law and theater, and I loved her for it. "You ever been in court before?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not like this." Helen smiled. Good. Don't act. Be yourself. You're the only one in this story who hasn't lied. By the time we stood up to leave, I felt taller somehow. Not because I had everything solved, but because I wasn't standing alone. Outside, the air was warming up fast. That New Mexico sun didn't wait for anyone. Helen paused beside her car and said, "One more thing. Don't talk to Alan again. No calls, no meetings. From here on out, everything runs through me." I nodded. She opened her door, then looked back over the roof. "And Marissa? Let's see if Alan still laughs when he's under oath." Let's see if Alan laughs when he's under oath. If you've ever had a number change the way people look at you, not your smile, not your story, just a dollar figure, then you know exactly what this part of the story feels like. $5,027.48. That was the number on the check I held in my hand that morning. It wasn't life-changing. It wasn't a lottery ticket. But it was something they couldn't laugh at anymore. And I knew it the second I opened the envelope from the utility company and saw that number. Because it was real. Real solar output. Real grid energy. Real money. From land they all called a joke. The trailer still smelled like dust and coffee when I pinned the check to the corkboard I'd set up near my whiteboard calendar. Beneath it were notes from Grandpa's tapes, solar stats, and a sticky note that said, in my handwriting, "They won't believe it until they see it." Well, now they could see it, because just an hour later, I got an email from a reporter named Rachel Kessler with the Albuquerque Journal. Subject line: Woman-led solar project in Deming gaining attention? I read it 3 times, like it might vanish. The article ran 2 days later. It wasn't front-page news or anything dramatic, but it was public. And that changed everything. The headline read, "From Dust to Power, Local Teachers' Solar Project Lights Up 3,000 Homes." They even used the photo I'd sent of me standing on the edge of the panel rows, sun setting behind me. Not glamorous, just honest. That same evening, I noticed a black SUV pulling up near the trailer. My stomach sank before I even saw the driver step out. Alan. Tan blazer, polished shoes, the same smug tilt to his chin he'd always had at Thanksgiving dinner. I opened the trailer door slowly. Didn't invite him in. He didn't wait. "Got your little spotlight, huh?" he said, glancing at the panels. "Big media moment. Cute." I didn't flinch. "Is there something you need?" He looked past me, into the trailer. I stepped sideways, blocking his view. "You know the land was never really yours," he said. "That will's being reviewed again. Our lawyer found additional clauses." I cut him off. "Your lawyer also forgot that notaries have expiration dates. That amendment's a joke." Alan's jaw twitched. He stepped closer, lowering his voice like we were in some kind of sibling secret club. "I'm offering you a way out, Marissa, a real deal. You sell the land back to the estate, we all win. You get cash up front, we manage it from there." I stared at him for a beat, then walked back inside without saying a word. Let the door swing shut behind me. Inside, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but fury. I sat at my makeshift desk, facing the pinned check, and took a breath. Then I said out loud, to no one but the desert wind and Grandpa's old cassette player, "You didn't want this land until it started paying you." I turned back to the window, where Alan stood by his car, waiting. "You're not coming back for Grandpa," I said, quieter this time. "You're coming back for greed." I didn't open the door again. He left, but I knew that wouldn't be the last time. "You didn't want this land until it started paying you. You're not coming back for Grandpa. You're coming back for greed." Some people think courtrooms are quiet, cold, polite. They're not. They're full of heat. Not from the sun, but from everything people don't say out loud. From the lies dressed up in legalese. From the way a father can sit across from his daughter like they've never met. That's what this day felt like fire. I wore navy, not black, too dramatic, not beige, too apologetic. Navy meant I belonged there. Helen sat beside me, calm, reading over our notes for the 100th time. Her glasses slid low on her nose, but her voice was clear. Stick to what's documented. Don't let them bait you. Across the mediation table, Alan, our father, and the smug man in the gray pinstripe suit they called legal counsel. I didn't even get a hello. The mediator was a woman in her 60s with tight curls and sharper eyes. She introduced everyone, then got right to it. Alan's lawyer slid a folder across the table. The Langley Estate Amendment dated April 3, 2022. This document clarifies that Mr. Lewis Langley intended to leave the Deming property to his son, not his granddaughter. The signature looked familiar because they'd traced it sloppily. Helen didn't flinch. That document wasn't part of probate. Nor was it notarized correctly. The notary on file expired in 2019. The lawyer cleared his throat. It was an oversight. No, I said quietly. It was forgery. The mediator raised an eyebrow. You're accusing the estate of fraud? I'm not accusing, I replied, reaching into my briefcase. I'm proving. I placed the old tape recorder on the table. The room went still. Lewis Langley, recorded October 18, 2021, I said. Play it. Helen pressed the button. My grandfather's voice crackled through the static like a ghost in the room. She's the only one who ever came out here without asking for a check. She asked for data, for sunlight, for patterns. That land belongs to Marissa. She'll build something the rest of them couldn't even imagine. No one spoke. Even Alan's lawyer's pen stopped moving. I looked directly at the mediator. We have 12 tapes, all dated, along with blueprints in my name. Deeds. Soil studies, and a will that passed probate clean. Their version showed up after the land started making money. Our father shifted in his seat, arms crossed, lips pressed into a hard line. Alan finally said, This doesn't change the fact that it was family land. We have a right. You had a chance, I snapped. And you laughed. You handed me 30 acres of dust and acted like it was a joke. And when it turned out to be valuable, suddenly it was your legacy. Yand. The mediator nodded slowly, eyes now on Alan's lawyer. Do you have documentation showing this amendment was signed in front of a licensed notary still in commission? Silence. Then, we are still gathering some paperwork. Helen leaned forward. While they're gathering excuses, I have a certified document trail, time-stamped footage from the clerk's office, and a notarized declaration from the project's financial backer stating all legal ownership sits solely with my client. It was a quiet kind of obliteration. The judge leaned in, just a little. And you have the originals? I met her eyes, held them. Every last one. The judge leaned forward. And you have the originals? Marissa. Every last one. I thought the courtroom would be the loudest part, but it turns out justice, real justice, it lands quiet, like a gavel echoing after the sound is already gone, like a paper being signed in a closed office, sealing your future while the people who tried to steal it scramble in the background. That's what happened next. 3 days after mediation, the call came in from Helen. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the edge underneath. The kind of thrill only someone who's been fighting the good fight for decades gets when the system actually works. County Board of Ethics reviewed your video. Alan's wife has been suspended pending an investigation into document interference. I stood in the middle of my trailer kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, hand frozen over the coffee pot. Suspended. I didn't even have to say a word. Helen kept going. The amended will has been rejected as inadmissible. Officially. The clerk's office just logged the ruling. Your land remains solely in your name. Full ownership. No further contest. I sat down hard on the edge of the camper bed. The same place I'd cried on when I first saw the dust storms roll through this place. Now it felt different. Still dusty, still hot. But it was mine, fully, legally, and loudly. Relief washed over me, but it wasn't loud either. It was a slow tide, one that pulled back months of tension like it was clearing space for something new. I looked around the trailer. The taped-up blueprints, Grandpa's tapes stacked like sacred relics, the blinking inverter light, the little whiteboard where I'd written power output goals. All of it had survived. So had I. Later that afternoon, I drove into town. Not for any reason. I didn't need groceries. I just needed to breathe in air that wasn't soaked in old fear. At the diner, Margaret waved me over to her usual booth. You heard, didn't you? Word travels fast in a small town, I said, sliding into the seat. She gave me a once-over. You look different. I feel different. We sipped coffee in silence for a while, watching dust devils curl in the distance. She finally asked, "What are you going to do now?" I looked out the window, squinting into the light. Build something no one can ever erase. That night, I sat out on the trailer's front step, legs curled under me, one of Grandpa's tapes playing softly through the little speaker. If they doubt you, Marissa, that's fine. Just don't let them undo you. The stars overhead were sharp as nails, each one punching through the black like they had something to prove. Just like me. And then, my phone buzzed. Tommy, you're on the map now. I blinked, confused. Typed back. What map? Tommy. Google alerts. Solar Watch picked up your site. Project Langley is trending in renewable forums. I clicked the link he sent. My solar grid, my trailer, was listed in a roundup of grassroots energy innovators. Someone had uploaded a drone shot of the panels catching full sun. There were comments, shares, engineers asking how I'd done it on such a small budget. I laughed. Not the bitter kind. The good kind. The kind that doesn't feel like defense anymore. This was happening. Tommy texts. You're on the map now. Literally. Your project's trending. Have you ever had your win go public after being underestimated? Drop a number 2 if you know the glow-up hits different when no one saw it coming. I was supposed to be fixing the porch. One of the support beams had warped from the monsoon rains, and I didn't want the whole step collapsing while I was carrying panels. I'd grabbed a crowbar and kneeled down, thinking it would be a quick 30-minute repair before lunch. Instead, I heard a hollow thunk beneath the wood. Not the dull sound of packed desert dirt. This was sharper. Echoed. I paused. Knocked again. Definitely hollow. By now, I should have expected secrets. Grandpa was never a man of surface-level plans, but I still wasn't ready for what I found when I pried up the panel. Beneath the floorboards was a narrow wooden compartment, sealed but not locked, just waiting. Inside, wrapped in an old military blanket, were 2 things. A notebook bound in cracked leather with Grandpa's initials burned into the cover, A waterproof envelope marked in his handwriting. Phase 2. Only if she's ready. I didn't breathe for a few seconds. Back inside the trailer, I set them on the table and just stared. My hands were shaking. The notebook came first. His handwriting was smaller here, more precise. Not like the letters he used to send me in college. This looked like field notes, engineering diagrams, timestamps, solar intensity logs. But it wasn't just data. It was a roadmap, a plan to expand the solar grid onto the adjacent BLM, Bureau of Land Management land. Grandpa had identified an overlapping lease zone, land the government hadn't allocated yet, but would soon. He'd even started the paperwork. It was never submitted, but it was ready, and I had access now. Then the envelope. I tore it open gently, like it might break the air. Inside, a certified environmental study stamped and signed in 1987. A draft proposal for federal partnership. A typed letter from Grandpa addressed to Marissa, if you're reading this. He'd written, "Most people bury dreams under fear, but not you. You kept digging. This land can do more than light a trailer. It can light a region, but only if you're ready to carry it beyond my lifetime." I don't know how long I sat there. The notebook open, the letter in my lap. It was one thing to carry Grandpa's vision forward. It was another to realize he'd seen this far ahead, farther than any of us had. He wasn't just protecting my future, he was planting it. That evening, I stood on the porch, the same porch that had hidden everything, and looked out across the land. To the west was the BLM property, flat, untouched, waiting. This wasn't just about proving Alan wrong anymore. This was about legacy, about vision, about power that didn't come from inheritance, but from intention. The next morning, I emailed Helen. Subject, new development, need BLM. Lease guidance. She called within an hour. "You're telling me your grandfather prepared an expansion plan into public land, and you have documents to prove the viability?" "Yes, and the lease line hasn't been claimed yet. I checked the database this morning." I could hear her grinning through the phone. "Marissa, this isn't just a solar farm anymore. This could qualify for regional innovation funding." I exhaled. Then let's build something that lasts. He wasn't just planning for me. He was planning for a whole future. If you had told me a year ago that I'd be the keynote speaker at a renewable energy summit in our dusty little town, I would have laughed. Not because I didn't believe in the dream, but because I knew exactly how little this town believed in me. And yet there I was, standing under a plastic banner that read, "Bright Futures, New Mexico Solar Leaders." Wearing a linen blazer that still had dust in the cuffs from this morning's panel installation. The folding chairs were mostly filled with engineers, farmers, reporters, and one city councilman who kept wiping sweat off his bald head. And near the back, there they were, Alan, Mom, Dad, like ghosts in broad daylight. I almost didn't recognize them. Not because they'd changed, but because their faces were arranged in something unfamiliar, forced pride. Alan had even put on one of his vineyard polos. Like that made him more respectable. Mom was clutching a pamphlet. Dad was shaking hands with someone like he was the one who'd just secured a $250,000 DOE expansion grant. For a second, I actually felt something close to nostalgia. Like my teenage self wanted to believe maybe, just maybe, they were here to genuinely support me. But then Alan smiled, that crooked, smug little twist of his mouth, the one he always used before a manipulation. And just like that, the nostalgia cracked. After the panel discussion ended, After I'd answered questions about solar grid limits, water table displacement, and energy equity, I stepped off the stage. Dad was already there, hand extended like we were strangers at a business mixer. "Marissa," he said, nodding, "you handled yourself well up there. Very impressive. Your grandfather would be proud." My jaw tightened. I nodded but didn't shake his hand. Mom stepped in next. "We've been following your work. The article in the journal was so moving." She reached out as if to touch my arm. I stepped back without thinking. "Oh, now you read the journal," I said. "That's new." Alan chuckled lightly, like this was all a funny misunderstanding. "Look, Maris, what you're building out there, it's bigger than anyone expected. Honestly, we didn't realize how serious this was. This being the farm or Grandpa's will?" His smile faded. I saw a flicker of irritation cross his face, but he masked it quickly. "Look," he said, "we came because, well, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. But we're family. And something like this, the BLM lease, the expansion, it's going to need management, oversight, people who know business." I folded my arms. "You want to help manage it?" Dad cleared his throat. "It's a lot for one person, sweetheart. This kind of growth. If it's not handled right, it could collapse." Mom jumped in. "And we just don't want to see you taken advantage of. You're smart, but some things, like land deals and scaling, that's Alan's world. We could help. Make sure no one exploits your good intentions." I stared at the three of them. The same three people who gave me dirt and a tin roof while they drove off with the vineyard, the cars, the antique clocks. Now they wanted a seat at the table they didn't even know I was building. I smiled, cordially, calmly, like I was the one with the vineyard now. "That's kind of you," I said, voice even. "But I've got a legal team, a DOE liaison, and a regional investor group. You wouldn't believe how many people want to help now that the numbers are public." Alan shifted. Dad opened his mouth, then closed it. I leaned in slightly. "But just so we're clear, I still remember the forged will, the zoning delays, the way you all laughed when they handed me that rusty key." I stepped back again, straightened my blazer, and let the silence hang. They didn't argue, didn't apologize either. They just stood there, stunned and silent, like people who'd shown up too late to the auction. Later, as I walked past the solar panel booths and free granola bars on folding tables, someone tapped me on the shoulder. It was Tommy. He nodded toward the parking lot. "Was that your brother I saw leaving with his tail between his legs?" I smirked. Funny how people remember your worth after it goes up in dollars. Have you ever had someone show up once the success was already built? Drop a number 1 if they suddenly remembered your value when the money did. The sky was the kind of gold that only happens after a hard-earned day. Not just warm, earned. Like the sun was nodding at me in quiet approval. I walked the perimeter of the array barefoot, like I used to as a kid in Grandpa's garden. Only now, instead of rows of tomatoes, it was rows of polished panels, soaking in the last rays of the day. And I wasn't a curious little girl with a magnifying glass anymore. I was her, but grown, proven. And I'd just opened the email that changed everything, $250,000. That was the grant amount. Official, approved, sealed with digital signatures and federal backing. It wasn't just money. It was legitimacy, recognition, fuel. The DOE called it one of the most promising regional solar developments led by an independent innovator. That was me. Me. The woman they laughed out of the will reading, the teacher with no business plan, the quiet science kid who didn't belong at the vineyard table. And now, they'd need my light to keep their vines alive. I kept walking. The panels stretched like soldiers in formation, absorbing what little light remained. Some were still warm beneath my feet, Others had cooled already. Funny how something silent could be so powerful. That was the thing about solar. It didn't bark, didn't fight, didn't demand to be noticed. It just worked, consistent, unapologetic. Unbothered by shadows because it knew the light would come back. At the edge of the property, I stopped and pulled the folded envelope from my pocket. Inside was an irrigation audit I'd requested weeks ago, quietly, without fanfare. It showed Alan's vineyard was 2 seasons away from collapse unless he overhauled his water systems. The well was running dry, the old pumps were inefficient, and climate data was not on his side. I could have tossed it, burned it, let nature run its course, but instead, I'd printed the report, sealed it in a plain manila envelope, and typed out his address. No return name, no note, just the truth, just data, just a chance to do something with it. Or not. It wasn't mercy, not exactly. It was clarity, because revenge didn't have to roar. Sometimes it whispered, sometimes it simply didn't stop you when it could have. That's a different kind of power. Chapter. I turned back toward the trailer, now outfitted as a tiny office, and past the crate Grandpa had labeled Phase 2. We'd already begun drafting the lease request for the BLM parcel next door. Tommy said there were murmurs that a senator's office was watching the project now. Margaret from the library had dropped off a scrapbook of Grandpa's old science fair clippings. Said she thought he'd like to be remembered for more than just land. I'd tucked it next to the framed $600 check. Our first payout. The beginning of what we'd built. Inside the trailer, dusk cast soft shadows across the floor. I pulled open the window and let the breeze drift in, warm and dry and clean. The kind of air that only passes through when the fight is over. I didn't need their apologies anymore. I didn't need to be at the holiday table, because I had something better than validation. I had legacy. I had impact. And I had peace. Check. I stepped out one last time, the panels now glowing under the last blush of sky. As I reached the center of the array, where the very first panel was laid, I looked up at the wide-open horizon and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding for years. Then I whispered, not to anyone in particular, "Light doesn't pick sides, it just shines." They came with lawn chairs and sun hats. Kids tugged at their parents' hands, asking questions about the panels. Someone brought lemonade. Someone else brought a homemade cake with the words, "Here comes the sun," written in shaky yellow frosting. And standing in the middle of it all was me. The girl who used to sit cross-legged in the dirt behind a vineyard house, building pretend circuits out of tinfoil and chewing gum wrappers. Now I was the woman hosting a solar farm dedication. The plaque read, "Langley Light, a legacy of resilience and sunlight." Underneath that, "For those who see what others don't." That last line was for Grandpa. For every whispered encouragement over old science books. For every cassette he left me when the rest of the family left. Nothing. I'd never seen so many unfamiliar faces gathered in one place. Farmers, reporters, librarians, engineers, city council members. They'd come from Deming, from Las Cruces, even Albuquerque. Margaret stood beside me at the podium, beaming like a second grandmother. Tommy handed out flyers explaining how the system worked. His shirt was wrinkled, but his smile was proud. And somewhere near the back, Alan stood stiffly in a blazer, pretending to blend in with the crowd. My parents weren't far from him, hovering like ghosts in the shade of someone else's success. I didn't acknowledge them. They weren't here for light. They were here for attention. And I'd finally learned the difference. The microphone crackled as I stepped up. I took a breath. Looked out at the sea of people and the blue-black panels humming quietly behind me. "This land used to be considered worthless," I began, my voice surprisingly steady. 30 acres of dust, sand, and sun. A pause. But maybe that's what legacy is. Not what you inherit, but what you build from it. A few nods. Someone clapped. I reached down into the wooden box beside me and pulled out one last cassette, marked simply M. I pressed play. Grandpa's voice came through. Clear, worn, warm. The ones who change the world don't need permission. They need sunlight. And sometimes, they need a granddaughter who never stopped listening. It was the last recording. No instructions, no data charts. Just belief. Just love. The crowd was quiet for a long moment. Then, someone started clapping. Another followed. Then another. Not for me. For what the land had become. For what belief, perseverance, and quiet rebellion could do. Chapter 8. After the ceremony, I walked back to the office trailer and sat at the old desk. The desk Grandpa had built by hand. The one he'd carved initials into when I was 12 and said, "One day, this'll be yours." I looked down at the final lease agreement. The expansion to 50 acres had been approved. Signed. Stamped. All that was left was my signature. I picked up the pen and wrote my name with a steady hand. Marissa Langley. Owner, founder, operator. Langley Light. The printer clicked as it confirmed the document. I sat back, exhaled, and looked out the window. It was dusk again. The kind of light Grandpa used to say was the most honest. Not hiding, not showing off. Just there, quiet, true. I thought of every obstacle, every laugh, every delay, every time they told me I didn't belong, and I smiled, because belonging doesn't come from being given a place, it comes from creating one. Chapter 8. Alan would probably contest something again. My parents would keep rewriting history, but I wouldn't spend my energy looking backward anymore. I had panels to install, a community to power, and a life that didn't need their signatures to mean something. I walked out toward the array, the last of the sunlight kissing the panels with one final flicker of gold. I laid a hand on the metal frame of the first unit, the one powered by the prototype Grandpa and I had drawn up on a napkin. Then I whispered, more to the wind than anyone, "They gave me dust. I turned it into power, and no one will ever take that from me again."